What's up, everybody? It's your favorite business coach, Frank Harita, and another episode of Focused Free Fit. And today we have Scott Allan. I'm very excited to talk with Scott. Scott, welcome. And why don't we get started with you telling us a little bit about yourself? I always like to start with your upbringing. I always like to understand a little bit about people from the very, very beginning. So where you grew up, which we just talked about for a minute or two, but I'd love to go deeper. So where you grew up, family, how that kind of impacted you, and then just kind of we'll go from there.
Absolutely, sure. So yes, my name's Scott Allan. I am an author, motivational speaker, and I love creating content. So a content creator as well. And as we were just discussing before we started here, I just got back from Canada probably about 12 hours ago. And that is where I'm from. I'm from Halifax, Nova Scotia originally. And just growing up, so I'll just circle back to a few things that's going to lead into probably eventually how I got into books and the whole business. But as I was visiting with my mother last week, your mothers or your parents love to tell stories and remind you of things you used to do when you're growing up. And one of the things she still talks about is when I was little or younger, I was always building things. So, and that's the thing is like, I remember when we had a house back in the day out in the middle of the forest. I built like a 3 or 4 story fort, with all this wood that I just got from bits and pieces. I remember going around with my friends. I collect all these, the materials, bring them back. And within a few months, we had this fort in the back of our yard. So I was always putting things together, kind of, leading the other kids into what goes where. And I would even, be making blueprints for these things, and I was like 8 years old. So always just loved being creative and building something and there's still something in me that continues to just want to put more out there, whether it's creating videos, creating books, creating content. It's just something that really drives me. But, growing up, I was always influenced by movies. So I love movies. Grew up with, Spielberg and Lucas and Star Wars and Indiana Jones and all those movies. And one of the things that, again, that my mother would remind me that I used to do is I would go and watch these movies, and then I would come home and I'd try to act out the characters. So, for example, if I watched Indiana Jones, I come home and try to I'd make my own bullwhip. And if I if I watched some movie, I try to reenact everything. So I always wanted to get into something that had to do with acting or directing, or eventually got into writing because that was really, I love books. So I was always reading books and then coming up with stories, and I still do that. Although my published works is for the most part nonfiction, self-help, personal development, I actually started out as a fiction author, and I will be publishing those books eventually because I'm just driven by, telling stories as well. So again, so there's a lot of the things in my past was about building things, reenacting, scenes in movies, and just trying to do something different all the time. I just love to experience life, so I'm always looking for, a new experience. I do get a little bit bored and restless easily, and when I do, it's like, okay, I don't need to change my whole life, but it's a signal to me that I need to change something. I need to stir things up a little bit and do something new. So I just love trying new things.
I think you and I share that in common. I'm very much like that, so I can relate. So early life, you're Nova Scotia. When did you make the transition away to where you are, or were you what age were you in Nova Scotia till, and how did that transition take place?
Oh, wow. Okay. I'll go back a little ways because I'm 54 now. So I came to Japan when I was 28. So I've been here for almost half my life. Just before I get into that, though, just going back a little ways, when I was in Nova Scotia, after I finished university, there weren't that many jobs around. And so I had a couple of choices. I could just stay living at home with mom and dad, which is what I was doing. I was on my own for a couple of years before that. I just went out into the world, worked a few jobs, and I realized, you probably, need a better education to get a better job. So I went back to school and got certified as an electrical engineer. And then after that, like I said, there weren't that many jobs around. So my friend was out in Vancouver and Victoria City, which is Vancouver Island. And he said, "Why don't you come out here? There's a big boom going on. You'll probably find a job." And I thought, well, never really left home before, I'm leaving mom and dad's nest, and and I am 22. Maybe it's time for that. So to be honest, something inside me just said, yeah, that's what I'm going to do. And it was a bit of a scary move, but it was just something inside me just said, you have to go out there and find out what's out there in the world. Because by staying, in my comfy little zone with like staying at mom and dad's house in a small little town, had a great life. Don't get me wrong, lots of friends and everything. But I realized like I had to make a change, right? So I did. And I told mom and dad I'm moving out to the West. And I did. And I just got on an airplane, had $100 in a suitcase. And I went out there and found a couple of jobs within a week or two. And fast forwarding a little bit, the reason that that's an important story is because I went out there with nothing and I managed to, build a pretty good life for myself. So I had the proof that I could do this again. So years later, I would say there's a few things to the story as well. Like I was really heavy into partying and drinking, and that got really out of control. And so I had to either stop that or it was going to, probably put me in the ground. So, and that's what the doctors told me is like, if you come back here one more time, it may be the last time. And that didn't scare me. It's just that I realized like I wanted to lead a better life than I was living. And again, like I always had a lot of energy too, right? So a lot of my, what I was putting into drinking and partying, when I actually got that under control and I shifted that energy into doing better things with my life, like helping people and, like creating something like that, that creativity part of my like came back, and I was able to focus that energy. So how I ended up in Japan though is I think an interesting story. So as I was going through recovery and working with, I had a sponsor and I had a mentor and a coach, and they were always pushing me to, go to my next level, whichever that was. And I didn't even really have a vision for what that was. I was just trying to get, trying to get my mind clear, which at the time it just needed a really good cleaning. And so, one day I was in the bookstore and I came across Tony Robbins' book, Awaken the Giant Within, which is, that was written like 30 years ago, still a very relevant book, amazing book. And when I started going through it, Tony started talking about, building out your goals and having a vision board and a vision for your life. And I thought, yeah, like that just resonated with me, right? Because I'm really, I'm a visual learner, I'm always thinking about stories and things like that. And so when I started to put this vision together of what a life could look like, I suddenly realized like what I want to do. And it was like, I wanted to do actually, well, there's two things I really wanted to do. One was I wanted to be a writer. And that was something since I was a kid, when I was putting stories together, I was writing way back then. And even though I had given it up for a very long time, that dream was still sitting inside of me, like a little spark, and it was still there. So that was on my vision board and my goal list. And the second thing is I wanted to travel the world. Now, again, I hadn't been around that much. I hadn't gone to that many countries. To be honest, I'd never really traveled at all. But something said, you've got to get out there and find out like what exists in other cultures. What are other people doing? Let's go to Bangkok and find out. And suddenly I just had these ideas of all these places I wanted to go to. And with it, I remember staying up all night and just putting together in a journal all the things that I was going to do. And the next day I woke up, started building this vision board. I had made a decision, maybe it was overnight, I don't know, in my dreams, like I'm going to go to the other side of the world, start a new life, and I'm going to give myself a year to get there. And it's just like a definitive decision. Did not change my mind after making that decision. And I just call it the pivotal point of your life where like you decide something and there's no going back. So I did. I even had the date in mind. It was like March 26th, which would have been like back in 98. So anyway, I had a plan now, right? And, and I'd given up the drinking and I was getting back on track, getting some health, getting clarity around what I really wanted to do. And the clarity was the key, right? Because there's nothing like knowing exactly what you want to do and also not knowing how you're going to get it, just knowing you want to get it and that somehow it's going to work itself out. And that's actually what happened is because when I made that decision, things started happening. I started meeting people that had traveled before to these places. And what would happen too is like to make this dream a reality, I had to actually start living it now. So I went to the library because this was even like before we had internet really. So I remember going to the library, getting all these books on how to speak Vietnamese. And I go to the bookstore and buy these books on these places I wanted to travel to. And just, I'd be home, practicing Thai and Vietnamese. And my roommates would come home and they're like, what are you doing? They just went out for the night. They come back the next morning, and I'm up early and I'm on the floor with all these books, and they're like, oh yeah, this is interesting. We don't know what he's going to be doing with all this stuff, but I
Right.
just said to them like, I won't be here in a year from now. So
Yeah.
anything you want to say to me, say it now, but I was just like that determined. Right. Um, so anyway, what
That's
happened is it, yeah. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Then I'll
no. I was gonna say that's really
yeah,
interesting.
yeah.
And before you continue, there's like
Mm,
8 questions or comments I have on all. You've said so much stuff. It's amazing. Um, so I think about the entrepreneurs or the small
mm,
business or large business individuals that are going to listen to this. And I feel like, and even the people that want to get into business or just want more for their life, right? And they just know, there's something I talk to my clients about, and that is the law of diminishing intent. I
mm,
believe that's what it's called. And I heard this once years ago, and I thought it was really interesting. I think it was Jim Rohn that said it. But it
mhm,
was, if you have an idea or something you're passionate about, and then you don't take action right away, every day you wait, there's less likely of a chance that you
mhm,
actually go forward with that thing. And so, what I can appreciate about what you said was, this seems to be a pattern, and I'm the same way. Is when you have an idea or you have something, you have to take action,
mhm,
and that I feel like is what you did. You said, "Hey, I feel a calling to go this way, or I feel this." Don't let oh, here's what I can't do get in your way. It's okay, I'm going to
mm.
do it. I made a declaration and then I acted on it and I started taking action. And I feel like, how big of a deal do you think that was to play a part in the next part of your journey?
Absolutely. So here's the thing. Like, I know a lot of people talk about the things that they want to do, and I've done that too before. Like before I started actually sitting down and writing books, I was talking about it for a year or two, like, and that was one of those things that I was always going to do someday. And the thing is like, yeah, the more you say it, and then you don't do anything about it, you're actually proving to yourself that, oh, I'm just talking about it. I don't really plan on doing this thing, even though you probably want to. And I think that when it comes to like the law of diminishing intent is like, yeah, I intend to do it, but it's going to be one of those things on my bucket list when I have more time, when I have more money, when I have more resources. And like Tony Robbins said, it's not resources you're lacking, it's resourcefulness. It's like
Mhm.
you already have everything you need. And the thing is, I mean, I started my business even when I published my first book. I had didn't have any money for it. I had time, but I didn't have a lot of time because I had a young family with kids and pets and everything that demanded my attention and a full time job at the time. So there was always like, when we look at these things as obstacles, and I guess they are, but we let them hold us back too, because it's like, well, I'm going to do these things when I have more time and money and this. And the thing is, we never have enough time. We never have enough money. We never have enough resources. Those are the things that we build as we start to move forward. And the action, I mean, you don't have to go out and spend $20,000 on an expensive piece of software to do something. I've seen people build a business with $500, right? But you have to start with something. And for me, it was like, okay, I don't know how I'm going to start this business, but I know like, I don't need to know where I'm going to be 5 years from now. I mean, I do believe in planning and having a 5 year goal or plan. But the
Sure.
thing about most plans is that they don't work out the way you think they're going to anyway. And I've always said
What
like, I failed at many things, but the things that I failed at the most are the things that I didn't do. So,
Sure. What do
mm,
you feel like? You mentioned something, and I thought this was interesting. I thought of the book Think and Grow Rich. Have you ever read that book?
yeah, yeah.
So in that book, there's a part of it that talks about how in for individuals in their 40s, right?
Mhm,
They're not doing the things that take up time, the drinking, the partying. And so
yeah.
most people that are successful, it happens after 40 because they have this time now, right? And they're
Mm,
investing it into, and when you said, "Hey, I put my energy into these other areas," that's what I thought about. Um, and so that's what popped up my mind. And I feel like, the vision board piece,
mm,
how, so what do you feel? So you sat down, you did a vision board. You said, you made a declaration, you made a vision board. I see all these patterns here of books that I've read and I'm sure you've read, and
mhm.
what success looks like. And then how did it come true when you put on your vision board and you took action? How much of it actually became a reality for you? I hear that all the time. It's a common
Yeah,
theme. I did
yeah.
these things, and then before
Mhm.
long, I didn't know how it was going to come. I thought it was going to come this way. It didn't. It came this other way, but it ended up coming. Did that happen for you? Because usually it does.
It did. I'll tell you a quick story around that. So once I put the vision board together, a few months later, my roommate came home with a newspaper, and I've never read a newspaper in my life. I still don't. I just opened it to the entertainment section. And this particular day, I opened up the newspaper, and there was an ad right there that said, "Teach English in Japan. Apply now." Right now, I wasn't planning on going to Japan. I was planning on going to Thailand and just hanging out and starting from there. I don't know what's going to happen after that. But when I saw this in the paper, something said, "I'm doing that. I'm just going to apply. Don't know what's going to happen." I spent the day building out a resume and a cover letter and sent it off and ended up getting the job here, which brought me over here. And where this story is going is that on my vision board, I did have a picture of Japan, which again, I wasn't intending to go there, but I also had a picture of like the Golden Buddha in Thailand that's lying down and sleeping. It's like a lot of people see that when they go there. 2 years later, after I came here, and then, this was always my home base, and I had a, great job and everything. So I would just take vacations to Thailand. And one day I was there for like I think I was there my first or second time. I've been there a few times, but I was standing in front of this golden statue one day, this big Buddha in Bangkok. And it suddenly occurred to me that I was staring at the same exact picture that was on my vision board, which was like 2 or 3 years before, right? When I went to Vietnam, it was the same thing. I had a picture of some place on Vietnam, like a temple. That was on my vision board too. Now, whether or not the vision board led me to those places, I can't say. But what I do know is when I had this up on my wall every day, I was building a mental blueprint of the things that I really wanted to have. Because at my current job, I knew I didn't want to be in that job. I looked at the people that were in. I didn't want to end up like, 50 or 60 years old, really burned out and having no money. I wanted something bigger. So that's why the vision board was just really powerful. Now, I'm not saying you have to have a vision board to succeed. You can, but you do have to have you have to have a plan. You have to have clarity on what you really want. And then you just have to keep working towards the next step. You do have to have that vision though in your head, which is probably the most powerful place where it can exist. And that was just something, that's when I got into meditation too, just spending 10 or 15 minutes, sitting down, meditating, thinking about, like, dreaming about what the potential is, and that just excited me. Like, I could feel the energy just coursing through me. And recently I did a new vision board as well. So I still build them because, even after, like, that old vision board was, got me to where I wanted to be. But after that,
do another one.
Needed to
do another one.
Another
Where do you want to go next?
Yeah, exactly.
That's amazing.
So they do work.
That's really cool. Yeah, I think, and I hope everyone that's listening to this is taking note of, it's the take action. It's come up with goals, be specific, have a vision board of what you want. It sounds cheesy and, very fluffy, but it works. And it's also, I've found, has got to be up and visual, right? I mean, they call it a vision board, but so many people, they put it someplace they don't see it 24/7. And so I tell a lot of my clients, I'm like, look, you got to have your goals up and visual, what you're trying to shoot for. And I think that that's so important. That's really amazing. I love hearing this. Okay, so you're in Japan. You get this, I think this is where we left off. So you're in Japan and you apply for this job. How did that go and what went from there?
Yeah. So the thing is, I actually got the job before I came here. So the great thing is the company hired us while I was still in Vancouver, brought us over, flew us over, set up in homestay, gave us a car. I suddenly just went from, like in Canada, I had like a small 1-bedroom apartment and everything, and that was great. But then I came over here and I had, I think I doubled my salary. I was living in a great home and all these things. And I thought, this is more than I actually imagined. Like this, I wasn't even visualizing any of this. And I knew right away, like I was in all the way. So the other people, I came over with a few other people too, and they stayed for like 6 months or a year and went back home. But I knew, like, if I go back, I'm going to get into the same thing I was doing before. And it just didn't seem right. It seemed like this is part of the journey. This is the beginning of a new journey. And I just wanted to see how far I could go with it. So what I ended up doing is working in a company eventually that, they would send me out to companies like Toyota, Panasonic, bigger companies to, teach business English, actually, which was really interesting. I ended up working with like a lot of CEOs and business executives. And what they would do is they went overseas to negotiate and sell products and all these things. And I was training them to go over and just, how to, I don't know, blend into the culture. So it was really like, not just teaching them about the language, but it was how to teach them about the culture as well, so they could adapt better. So,
so you wanted to be a writer. Clearly, you've written multiple books. We're going to talk about that. I want to get into, the book you wrote or some of the books you wrote, but
Mm,
the number one that we talked about before this was Doing the Hard Thing First, I think. But,
mhm,
let's talk about that, but the other books as well.
mm, mm,
And also, how did culture in Japan affect what you did once you got there? Do you think that had anything to do when you compare it to America or
mm.
Canada? How did that change anything for you, or no, it was just you got there, you blended in and you just did your normal thing? Or do you think that had any impact on the success or anything that you did, like your drive and that kind of sort of thing?
Mm. Yeah, it certainly did. Because one of the things it taught me is that, blending into this culture is not an easy thing. And maybe that's for any foreign culture, I think. But I had a lot of friends who, I mean, not they were friends, but people I met who came here and they didn't adapt very well. They complained all the time about why their culture isn't like this and that. And I was always just like, well, you're not back home. This is the way things are here. So either if you don't adapt, you're going to end up just going home and complaining about
Great
how bad.
lesson right
Yeah,
there.
yeah,
Adapt or die.
yeah. And to me, I've always been very adaptable to very adverse conditions. So, if you put me in the middle of the Arctic and you gave me some clothes and a little bit of food, I could probably survive. I haven't had that experience yet. I'm just saying I probably could if I had to. But so and that's the same thing here. Like I was always looking for, if I were traveling to Kyoto or like always looking for these experiences in these very exotic places where you're like looking for the things that nobody had ever discovered before. Right. And to me, that's part of the adaptability, but also like learning the language. I have friends who have been here for like as long as I have or longer, and they still, can't order coffee in Japanese maybe. But I was right into it as soon as I got here. I got into the lessons. I started learning about the culture, but the language as well, which really is the culture. And what that did is that actually opened up a lot of opportunities for me for other jobs, relationships, communication, all those things. Like if you can speak the language, even if you're not totally fluent, right? You know enough just to, get by. You start with something and you just continue to build, and so if I had to go to the bank actually to negotiate a loan or something, most people would hire a translator to go there and do that for them. I would actually learn the language I needed to go in there to have that discussion, and I prepared for it before I went in. And sure, I didn't do it very well, but then I'd go in again and again, and I just kept doing these things again and again until I refined it, And it's not about perfectionism; it's just about getting things like making things better by just doing them, repeatedly, trying these things over and over and again. So for me, I mean, I think I had a lot of success here just because of that adaptability, and now because I think I've proven that I can probably, go through most experiences when I'm scared, and that's the key too. Is like I did most of the things when I was scared, when I was feeling the fear, and doing it anyway. And I've just always been, I mean, sure, yeah, I've been held back by procrastination, and that's a whole different, we can get into that later too. But I realized like, if I don't do this thing, I'm not going to get that thing that I really want. And that just always, that bothers me, like I just don't want to get to the end of my life or like 20, 30 years from now. It's like, I could have had that thing, but I didn't actually take action to get it. So, now I've got a regret, and we may have some regrets at the end, but to me, the only regrets that I'm really going to have are the regrets for the things that I didn't do that I know I could have when I had the chance.
So there's so many lessons in this podcast today. It's kind of crazy. I love that you said be flexible and adaptable. That's everything. I think the person that wins is always the person that's most able to adapt to change. Change is the only constant, right?
Mm,
And
mm,
so I love that. And then I love when you said, it didn't work the first time, but then I went back a second time and it was better. And then the third time and the fourth time. And that comes down to persistence, in my opinion. And that is probably my number one,
mm,
attribute that I'll tell people made the biggest difference in my life. And usually when I find someone who has done something they want to do. But let's go to the book. So tell me
mm,
about the book and what made you write that book. And then let's talk about, I would love to know what you think, but I find when I'm talking with individuals, coaching, businesses, what I
mm,
find is that when they can't get past something, it's either a limiting belief, it's a fear, a limiting belief, a fear, or the procrastination, like you said.
mhm, mm.
So let's talk about why you wrote the book and the title, and then how do those three relate and how do you help people with that?
Sure, yeah. So just going back a little ways too. So Do the Hard Things First was published in 2021, and it's
Okay.
probably, I don't remember what number it was, but I think it was like book 15 or 14. So it wasn't the first book I put out there, but it's probably the
Gotcha.
most successful. And to be honest, I don't even think it was the best book I've written, right? So, but it
What
was
book
the book
do
that
you
took
think,
off.
just
Yeah,
so people know, I mean, there's
yeah.
15, but the one that
Mm.
you think is the best, just before we go into do the hard thing first, what was the one you think is the best?
The one that I think is the best, and probably the one that I like the most, is Relaunch Your Life. I actually have two of them: Relaunch Your Life and Fail Big. Now, Relaunch Your Life was, I think, the third, maybe it was the fourth book. But the thing is that a lot of people don't know is like when they look at I guess, like, yeah, I've written a small library of books, but my first few books that I put out there, if we were to look at them as failures, they actually were, because if they didn't sell, and to be honest, I didn't know anything about marketing, and I didn't really care if they sold. Well, that's not true. I did want them to sell, but my goal was really just to publish a book and have my name on it. And then I was like, okay, like what's the next thing?
Hmm.
But something inside of me just said, no, we can't stop at this. And so what I did with those first few books is I actually just repackaged them, got better editors. So I guess what I'm saying is the first few books I put out there were really just tests. I did self-publish them back in 2013 when Amazon first launched their platform. This was back when like nobody really knew much about self-publishing at all. And I just like, again, like I'd spent years before that writing these books. So I was going to pitch them to a publisher actually, which I was already doing. Got a few rejection letters, which was good for rejection. But then when the self-publishing thing came around, I thought, well, why not just do that? My goal is just to publish the book. Maybe it'll get picked up later, maybe not. And so I just put them out there. They were well written. I think I had them edited, and I had covers on from Fiverr, which were not great. But my point though was like, I actually did end up taking those books off and relaunching them so that they were better products. And I think that's the whole
Mm,
thing with product development too, is like what holds a lot of people back is they don't want to put out that product that's flawed or something. And sure, some products shouldn't be flawed, especially if it comes to do with like driving a car or something. But I mean, a lot of these products, like Seth Godin always says, like, you just got to put it out there, and then you got to, revise it over time. And that anybody who's building products like knows that, like, they're going to launch the first version, the second version, the third version. So anyway, Do the Hard Things First came way later. Um, but the thing is like, it's just the book that really took off, I think. Now, Relaunch Your Life. The reason that's my favorite book is it was probably book number 4, and it was the book that actually started selling. Again, I had no plans for this. I had no expectations. I wrote the book because it was a book for my father. He had just passed away, actually, and I was writing the book because he knew I was writing this book. Like, I had this concept for this book I wanted to put together. I told him about it, and he's like, yeah, that sounds great. You've got to write it. So I really wrote it for him, and I wrote it after he passed away. So it kind of has an emotional attachment to it, but it also resonated with a lot of people. It's just about how to break through tough barriers and obstacles, and to lead a better life, actually, right? I probably didn't sum it up very well there, but people can check it out online. But the thing is, like, the book still sells really well today. It's in a few languages, yes. And this was actually when I went from being really broke to actually having some money in the bank, because now I was getting paid, like, I went from like getting a few dollars a month to like getting a few $1,000s from Amazon, which was like, wow, if I keep going, I might actually surpass my monthly income with my real job. And to be honest, up to that point, the writing was just a hobby. And here's the thing. I always told people, yeah, I publish books, but it's just a hobby. I'm not really looking to become and that was, I was saying that was not the truth.
yeah.
Inside, I wanted to be a business owner. I wanted to create something really big, but I wasn't going to tell people about that, because the imposter syndrome, which is actually the other thing that holds a lot of people back, was
Yes.
telling me, like, just go with the hobby story. Cause that's actually, even if you fail at it, nobody's going to care. So,
Hmm.
but when you start making some money at something, you realize, like, wow, what if I put out another book? And I did, and I got really aggressive, and I put out another book within 60 days, maybe. And that did really well too. And I thought, okay, maybe there's something to this. And that was when I felt like, I went from kind of having like the self-doubt actually started to turn into a belief. And the belief turned into, I think later it turned into, I'm not going to say a passion, an obsession. An obsession where it's like, now I'm going to make this thing work. Just like when before I had the obsession to travel around the world, now I had an obsession to create something from these books. And so later on, Do the Hard Things First, that actually was written coming out of COVID. And I'm jumping around a little bit, but what happened during COVID is that I've been publishing for quite a few years, had, 15 books out or so. And I was doing coaching and things like that around book publishing and everything. So I had a good little business going. And then I decided to leave my full-time job in 2019, which was, I wouldn't say it was a big decision. I just realized one day, you know what, I'm done with this. And I went and I gave my resignation for a company I've been with for like 20 years. But the thing is, though, is like, I knew it was time, and I did that. But then COVID hit, and everybody knows what happened with that. Everybody has their own story with that. And during that year, I went from, when I was working in an office with a lot of other people and I had a team that I was leading, and now suddenly I was at home living the dream, being a full-time writer, which we'll talk about what that means later. I found out it wasn't actually like typing 8 hours a day. Now I was home alone, kind of estranged from my family because my wife and I were getting separated and divorced, and I was living in a room with 3 dogs and trying to build this publishing empire. And so this is the story that I actually haven't really talked about very much, is that part of it. So you're kind of getting first dibs on this, but yeah, it's kind of interesting.
I think that's actually great, because not my intention, but I want to help. I think it's really important for you to maybe tell that story, because the people that are going to be listening to this are either want to start a business or are in a business. And these stories are really helpful, I think.
Yeah. Well, that's good to know. So what happened after that, left my full-time job, a year later. No, it wasn't even that. It was probably maybe a year later. Yeah. COVID hit. And then, something just, like working from home full time and all that, like it does sound exciting to a lot of people. And don't get me wrong, I think it's a good thing that if you can actually do that, and that is what I do now, but I mean, I'm loving it way more than I did way back then. But if you're somebody who's used to being like surrounding yourself with a lot of people, and your like communication is one of your strengths, which it is for me, and you just love being surrounded by people, sometimes working from home by yourself, like a lot of us found this out during COVID, is like, it's not the most healthy thing. And I ended up in the psych hospital a couple of times when I had deep regret for quitting my full-time job and thinking, what did I do? My books business started crashing because I wasn't publishing anything and I wasn't marketing anything. And inside of me, I think I felt like something was just looking for a way out. Like I wanted to give up, actually, and so went through that year of just basically surviving. And in 2021, I had this, I don't really remember when the idea came for putting this book together, but it was just there one day. And to be honest, this is how a lot of my book ideas come. It's not like I sit down and just think, what can the next project be? I get most of my ideas when I'm at the gym working out, like whatever it is, like I'm on a bench press and suddenly I get an idea for a book, and, I'll finish my set and I have to go and write down this idea. Like, that's just how things happen. And that may have been how this happened, actually. But I wrote the book with the theme of like how to overcome procrastination, because chronic procrastination was pretty much a business killer for me. Like it was really devastating. I mean, I think I call it chronic procrastination. There's probably a lot of, there's the psychology of it, though, was just, it was a lot. Like I nearly destroyed my business and my health from basically putting everything off, especially if it had to do with finances or looking at the numbers and all those things, by the way, that entrepreneurs need to know, knowing your numbers and all these things. Those were all the things I didn't want to do because they were not fun. And, I'd always worked in a company that did my taxes for me. Suddenly I had to do my own taxes. And that meant organization, and organization is not my strong point. It still isn't. But now at least I have an accountant and somebody else a partner who takes care of those things for me, because, I realized like I want to be an entrepreneur and build a business, but there are certain things that I just really, really struggle with. And I realized like, I don't have to get good at these things, but at least I need to find people and hire people that are good at them to help me with these things. So anyway, the You Do the Hard Things First book, I wrote it in about 60 days, published it. Again, I had no expectations. I just wanted to write another book that I really like. I felt, I'll call it passionate, but I just felt like really strongly that this book could really help people, because it's actually, selfishly speaking, I wrote it for myself because I had to get myself out of a hole. And it just, as it turns out, a lot of other people resonated with the topic. And so a year or two, 3 years. I think we're coming up on the three year anniversary where I just published the second edition of it. It's all cleaned up and everything like that. But it's been picked up by 16 publishers since then. So international published outside of the USA in 16 different languages. Now, again, I didn't plan for any of that, but what it's shown me is like, came out of COVID, things were really bad. And I realized like I had two choices: either maybe try to go back and get my old job back, or build a different career or something like that. And I didn't want to do that because I was very invested in this. And I just felt like, I just went through a very bad time, and where, emotionally and spiritually, I did believe though that I could come back from this. Right. So the good thing about the book is that putting this book out there and just watching it, it didn't like take off when I had the launch. I just published it really and just, it sold a few copies, but it took time for it to get out there. But I got back into my productivity funnel, was now like, I just felt completely different. And some of the things that really help with this, by the way, getting back into listening to online mentors and coaches, Tom Bilyeu, who runs Impact Theory, Ed Millett, like some of these influencers that I was just discovering for the first time. I started really listening to their material. And every day I would put in 2 or 3 hours of listening to people's podcasts. I got back into reading books. I'd really gotten away from the whole, like, I'm going to make myself great theme. Like I was, because I was just trying to survive, not become, not scale up the greatness. Right. But when I started like connecting with these other people, even though they were just online, but I was watching their videos, and I started to resonate with a lot of the things that they were talking about, like their struggles, and I realized like, wow, their struggles were a lot worse than mine. And if they made it, and they would be telling you how to get through these things, and I would apply these things, and they really worked, So we really have to listen to what other people are teaching you, because there's, the information is out there, the knowledge is out there, the help is out there. But you just
it's never been easier for that to be out there, right? I mean, with technology, there's pros and cons, but I mean, now it's never been easier to find the things that you want and learn the things you want. The content's out there.
Yeah.
Do you feel like, so go into more the detail of that book, so people can understand the premise. I mean, I think we understand because of the title, but I want to sell it short.
Yeah. So the book's about how to overcome procrastination. But here's the thing is like, and that's not a new concept, of course. I mean, there's research and it's been done to death, I think. Right. But I mean, I wrote it from my perspective. I have a little framework that goes with it. But what the book really is about, and the more I started to talk about it with people, I realized like that book's actually about learning to trust yourself again. Right. And that was really like, that's when it comes to procrastination, the reason that I would put everything off is because I didn't trust myself enough to actually follow through to get this thing done. And this is anything like filling out an application form for something that I really needed for my business. I wouldn't fill out the application form because forms just like scared me. I was like filling out a form, right? Because what if I fill out the form and send it in and it gets rejected, right? So there it is, like I started to discover what my real fears were. My fears about getting rejected, my fears of failure, like all these fears started coming back. And these were the things that were holding me back. And that's why I would procrastinate. I had an issue with a credit card bill where I've always paid my bills and all this, and I've never had my credit cards canceled. But this one bill in particular, I didn't pay for like 3 months because I'd only used the card one time, forgot about it. They were sending me, they sent me reminders all the time. And for whatever reason, I was just like, for me to pay this bill, I had to drive across town. It was a big pain. It would have taken me half my afternoon. And I just kept putting it off. And then one day I got a bill saying we canceled your credit card and all the others as well. So now I had no credit, and I realized like when that happened, it's like, oh, this procrastination thing actually is not working out very well. I just killed my credit. I can't hire anybody online. Like I need to hire people, in the virtual space because that's the only place where I really exist. And suddenly I couldn't do that without credit. So I just, like it's real damage to your business. Not to mention, I just killed the trust I had with myself if I had it at all. So the book actually is about that, right? It's like, because if you can overcome, some people call it the habit of procrastination. I really just think it's just a negative behavior. And sometimes it's a good thing though, right? I mean, procrastination can be a good thing, but I didn't write the book around, how great it is. I actually wrote it from the perspective of somebody who really suffered through it, because every time something difficult came up, I would look for a way to not do it. And these are the little triggers too. Like I started noticing the triggers. So when, my accountant asked me for something, they say, hey, we need to have this, the receipts in by Friday, whatever. Or he would ask me to go in and give him something today. If they asked me for something that had to be done today or tomorrow, I'll be like, yeah, I'll get it to you later. I'll do it tomorrow. There are all these little triggers that I would set myself up for failure by, pushing it off to the next day. And I realized it was like an ingrained, like the behavior was just already there, and I just kept buying into it and feeding into it all the time. And that's where I think it goes from being a habit to something where it was actually a chronic problem. And I still struggle with it too, right? But at least now I have, actually have a coach where he notices when I'm doing this. He's like, you just push that off to, next week, when actually you could have it done today if you just worked on it for 20 or 30 minutes. So people call me out on this, right? And you have to keep catching these things, because that's really what the book's around is built around, is like a little system of teaching you how to catch those triggers so that you can stop procrastinating. Not completely. I think we'll always, for me anyway, like I'll always feed into that behavior to some degree,
Sure.
but at least now I can see it. And the last thing too is like labeling is really important. So this goes back into, I think this comes back to when I was making plans to come to Japan. I used to identify myself as somebody who's a world traveler, an adventurer. I would start calling myself these things because that's what I wanted to become. Now, when it comes to negative behaviors, right, I would always call myself a procrastinator. And you hear people say this all the time. I am a, fill in the word, I am a procrastinator. I am a whatever. You start to live out that label. You start to live out that identity. And I just love the concept of identity, because here's the thing. You can build a new identity for yourself.
Yep.
So I realized, like, okay, I'm not a procrastinator. It's just something I do, right? I'm actually an action taker. So what I did is I stopped saying procrastinator. I replaced it with action taker. I spend 5 or 10 minutes or more every morning in front of the mirror, feeding myself these labels like, today I'm going to do this, this, and this because I'm an action taker. And I had to actually have this conversation with myself in front of the mirror, mirroring what Mel Robbins probably says in her books. The 5-second rule is like, get in front of the mirror and talk to yourself. And I mean, it really does work. It's uncomfortable. But this was the thing, is like changing the labels that I was putting on myself. And anybody can do this. I mean, these are not new concepts. It's just that, when we're stuck in negative behaviors, that just tends to be our identity. And that's why a lot of people don't change, is because they're just stuck in that and they believe like, oh, this is who I am, so this is what I'm going to do. But it doesn't have to be that way.
It's a choice. It's a choice every day. And I have those conversations with my clients all the time. It's a choice, and it's something we all have to remember. Self-talk is huge. So how important do you think, you mentioned imposter syndrome, and I agree with you. That is that's one of the top issues that I see people battle with. How big of an issue is imposter syndrome with integrity? Meaning I feel like the self-talk and the integrity you have for yourself is kind of linked to imposter syndrome. Or am I off?
So imposter syndrome, I think that it's kind of taken the wrong way, I think, in a lot. Like, we think imposter syndrome is a bad thing, right? So again, like that, and that does hold people back when they actually don't take action. But here's the thing, is that if you're trying to do something new, you're trying to create something that you've never created before, whether it's write a book or build a business, you're going to have imposter syndrome, right? Like I said, I had it for years, because when people ask me, about my books and stuff like that, I always said like it was a hobby, because my imposter syndrome told me I'm not actually good enough to become a full-time author, so I'm not going to take that risk, and it hold me back that way. But here's the thing, is like a lot of people will not move forward with something because they think that they're not worthy of having that thing that they really want. So imposter syndrome holds them back. But you're always going to feel like an imposter until you actually prove to yourself that, oh, this really is who I am. Now, maybe for me, I had to publish 10 or 15 books before I really started to take it seriously. But that doesn't mean it has to be that way. I could have, like my imposter syndrome was there from day one. and I wasn't ignoring it, but I wasn't allowing it to hold me back either. Yeah. And I think integrity is a great thing too. Like the integrity part of that is like, I felt like I owed it to myself to, if I've come this far, right? So I think the thing that I love to say is like, I didn't come this far just to come this far, which means that no matter what, moving forward is the only way to go. Because if you're not moving forward, you're either standing still, and what that really means is you're sliding back, and you're going to go back into old behaviors, and then time is going to go by, because it does. It just is not going to, doesn't wait for anybody. So whether and here's the thing too, like a lot of people when they hit their 40s, 50s and older, yeah, we have less time. But the thing is, like, that can be an excuse as well. Well, if I was going to do this thing, I would have done it when I was in my 20s and my 30s. And yes, that is true for certain things. I mean, I'm not going to be playing for the NBA or anything like that, but, so it really, I think time does matter, or age does matter, but don't let that hold you back as an excuse, because it's never too late until you actually make a decision that it is too late. Like you said, the choice is that is it. We have choices for most of the things. And, like somebody is waking up every day and they hate their job. And I get that, and they have to pay their bills. But remember, like, I think Tom Bilyeu used to wear t-shirts. I used to be in this mastermind community. He always had this t-shirt that said, "It's all my fault." And when we asked him about that, he said, well, if you can accept that everything is your fault, that's great. Like, now you have nobody else to blame. You have a choice in everything. And the only thing to decide now is like, now what am I going to do? Like, what's next? Now what? So I think that's a very simple concept, but it keeps me moving forward, because when I'm stuck, it's like, okay, well, I can't stay here. You're in the middle of the ocean. You got to keep swimming, right? So like, now what? You're going to, like, what's the next plan? What's the next move? Just like, what's the next small thing you can do? And this comes back to do the hard things first, is like, what's the next hard thing I have to do just to move myself forward on one step, one notch, and the imposter syndrome, whatever that may be, I mean, that's just going to come along with you for the ride, because I love imposter syndrome, because it's like, to me, that's like my dark little shadow, right? And again, I had it many times, but whenever I got to the point where I was feeling like, okay, I made it, like, I put out enough books. I don't feel like I have an imposter syndrome when it comes to writing, but now I've got a new goal where I want to be this kind of person. And suddenly the imposter syndrome is back, because imposter syndrome goes, whoa, like, that, are you really sure? Like, that's a really big goal. And that's not you, and you start to get the self-doubt and the fears and everything like that comes back. But I guess what I'm saying is, like, your imposter syndrome is something that is, I think it's a good thing. I think it's a motivator, right? And
that's a really interesting point. That you have. I mean, really, technically, it's kind of like, I had a conversation with someone yesterday, and I said, everybody, it was from someone who's doing something new. And I said, everybody's new at something they've never done before. So everybody's a newbie, right? So and that's kind of where the imposter syndrome comes in. And you're right. It's like, if you can power through that, you no longer are a newbie. As soon as you do it once, you're not a newbie. And it's like, okay, you're on your way, but you'll always have that feeling. So I get that. It makes sense.
Yeah. I'll tell you a little something. So a few months ago, you probably would not have gotten me onto an interview because I love public speaking. It's just that, and I've done quite a bit of it in the past, but when I did, whether I was on stage or in front of a camera, I was terrified. Like, I didn't show it, and sometimes I did, but sometimes I would get asked a question, I would just freeze, because I always thought, like, if I'm on stage, it's like, oh, everybody's looking at me, they're judging me, and then, like, who am I to be up here? Who are they to listen to me? And all these fears would just come up. So I think back in February or March, I just made the decision that I wanted to get over that fear, because my next goal was to, go from, okay, writer guy publishing books to, world-class motivational speaker and keynote speaker and all that. And that's like the big goal, right? And I realized, well, to get to there, you've got to go through the pain. You've got to go through the growing pains. And so I started doing more and more interviews. And the more I did, the more comfortable that I got talking to people about my past, about, who Scott really is, which is something, to be honest, I did not really talk about very much in most of my books, actually, until people started saying, this is a really good book, but there's not much of you in it. And I realized, like, I was holding back these things intentionally because I didn't want to get too vulnerable. And I realized that people actually want that. In fact, they probably appreciate it because then they realize, well, like if he's talking about that, maybe I could talk about my thing too. And, and I think like it just shows people like vulnerability is a good thing as well. But again, that's something else that can, the fear of being vulnerable is going to hold you back from doing the thing that you really want to do. Yeah. So that may be a
Really
lot to
interesting.
unpack, but yeah.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting, and it's really good stuff. Talk to me about a little bit. Has habits played a large role? I feel like they have, and that's kind of what
Mm,
you were touching on a little bit. And how does someone, that's trying to break a habit or like procrastination, right? So
mhm,
what's
mhm,
the, you said you have like a process, like what if I'm procrastinating? What if I'm doing things that don't serve me? I know you talk a little bit about mindset. What
mm,
is the process that someone goes through to say, okay, I've got to break this chain?
mhm.
What do I do?
Yeah. So what really helped me is to identify all of the things that were unfinished in my space, my virtual space where I have, tons of files like most people, my physical space where I have stuff all over the place that's just unfinished, right? So this could be a room that has been in, I have not decluttered my room for years, for example, or, my files are all over the computer, stuff like that. So I went through and I made a long list of all the things that had to be done that I was putting off because they were just not priorities. But what happens with all these, even the small little things, which, one of my mentors called them little pebbles that get into your 80-20, and you've got all these things that are, vying for your attention. I had to identify what everything was. So once I had this long list of all the stuff that needed to be finished, I would just pick one thing every day. Now, it wasn't necessarily the hardest thing on the list, right? Because the concept of do the hard things first doesn't mean you have to do the hardest thing, but you do have to do something that you're putting off, right? So what I do actually, and I still do this practice to this day, is the night before I go to bed, I write down the 3 things that I want to get done the day before. Now, I might only get one of those things out of 3 on like finished, and that's okay. The other 2 things will carry over to the next day. But just having that one thing done for the day is momentum because if you're doing one thing a day, within a year, you've got 360 things that you've finished. Now take a look at that and then look back over the year at all the things you've gotten done, and you realize, oh, okay, so I'm actually, this procrastination thing actually isn't really holding me back. I just wasn't doing anything. Or I was
Yep.
doing a lot of the things that were just like, like checking email 20 times a day and things like
Yeah.
that, that made me feel really busy. Because by the way, that's just one of those, we'll call it a distraction. But here's the thing. It's like my mind is always looking for, the road, not the road less traveled, but the road like the road that everybody else is taking, where they're getting distracted and doing all these things. I was always looking for, the path of least resistance, right? And I realized, like, okay, that may always be there. However, I'm going to take the road less traveled because I just love that. And by that, I mean, I'm going to do the things that, um, my mind is telling me like, okay, you have to do these things because these are the most important things that are moving you towards your goals. And to me, that's really what everything is about. And so what I also did is on that list, I had a list of all the things that had to be done. And over here on the other side, I had a list of my most important goals. So everything that I'm working on has to be related to my goals. And I have a lot of goals, but I'd identify like 3 of the top goals, right? So what I do throughout the day is I actually monitor my time. Now, I try to do this every day if I can, and I'll have I have a 2-hour time block every day where I built it in where it's my content creation time. Because if I'm getting that time in and dedicating that time to, and time blocking is not a new concept, I know, but here's the thing is like, we know about these things, but are we practicing them? Right.
That's right. That's right.
I've always known about time blocking and I even talked about it a lot in the past, but I wasn't actually doing it, which is the reason why procrastination and distraction were just taking over my day really. So when I actually got intentional with putting something in my calendar and saying, I'm going to show up for that, just like a dentist appointment, I started showing up for it. And then I started to get more things done. But you have to have clarity with like, what exactly is it that you're working towards? Because if you're working towards this thing and you're doing all these other things, which is what I was doing, then you're not going to get to your goal. And again, time going to go by, 5 or 10 years is going to go by. You're going to look back and go, I still didn't do that thing that I really wanted to. And now I'm 10 years older and, it always comes back to like, now what, I can't get that time back. So yeah.
Yeah. Okay. That's interesting. Um, and I find that is helpful. It's kind of like, you know, we know we need to use a calendar
Mm,
and we put it on the calendar, but if you don't look at the calendar every day and make it part of your routine, then it doesn't matter, right? And I think that's kind of along the lines of what you're saying.
yeah. I think though, fear does have a lot to play with it. Like when it comes to procrastination, there's certainly because yeah, like everything that I procrastinated on, when I looked at it, I did it because I was afraid of doing that thing. And it was something really silly, like paying the credit card bill, for example. If I'd taken an hour or two just out of my day to drive across town and get it straightened up with the bank, I wouldn't have ended up with bad credit for a year. So later on, you have to think about the consequences of that as well. Here's the other thing is like getting back to the vision board, having a vision board is important. But how about the anti-vision? So I also have an anti-vision for what's going to happen if I don't do this thing, right? So if I don't take care of this thing, this hard thing, whatever that may be, then what's going to be the result of that? What's going to be the consequences of that? And I will build an anti-vision around something that actually scares me. Like, I don't want that to happen. So I'm going to work on this thing because now I'm actually pushing myself forward, driven by my fear, because I don't want to, have to deal with the consequences of, a failed business or a failed relationship or whatever it may be. So having the anti-vision, to me, that was actually more of a motivator than having the vision itself.
Interesting. On the topic of goals, switching a little bit, what do you feel like, you can be doing the hard things and you can be, okay, here's where I want to go. How
Mm,
far out do you find, there's two ways to do this. I find that 3 years is probably like the
mhm,
most, it's still realistic when you're looking 3 years out. But then
mm,
I also have a 20-year letter that I write to myself that I say,
mhm.
okay, this is what I envision in 20 years my life looks like. Here's what's going on. Do you find that either one of those is helpful more than the other? One not very helpful? I'm just curious to know what your thoughts are.
Yeah. So I've done the 10 years and the 20-year goal. I found that, and this might be case by case, but I found that having a vision that was like way down the line, like something about it just didn't really
The
excite me
gap's too
enough.
big.
Yeah, the gap was just too big. And I think the reason for that is because I realized like 5, 10, 20 years from now, so much changes that
It's so true.
you can't
It's so
predict it,
true.
right? Yeah.
Every
Yeah.
year change. Are you kidding me? I mean, when you have any kind of goals, it's like, oh my gosh.
Yeah. So I have we'll say like the big vision, right? Now, for me, it's, like, okay, being in a bigger house, driving a nicer car, these things, they don't really motivate me, kind of. But I mean, I think that's what comes after you've already
They're
reached
short
your goal and
lived.
now you've got the stuff, right? But for me, like, yeah, like like having a 1 year goal, like I can actually, I can see that because 1 year goes by really quickly. And so if I actually take my 10-year plan, squeeze that into 1 year, and then I convince myself, well, I may not have 10 years. So I don't want to make a plan that's 10 or 20 years from now. Let's just say, let's play a game. Let's say you have 1 year to make this happen. How are you going to make it happen? And I think that just takes everything, like instead of me stretching out all my plans for 10 years and, you know, fooling myself into thinking I have all this time, I actually go with a 1 year plan, and then I just do as much as I can in that 1 year,
I love
right? And
that.
I find
That's
that I
kind
just
of
get a
like,
lot more done. So
yeah,
yeah,
no, I love that. That's kind of, I don't know if you've ever read the 12-week year,
I
but the
love that
12-week,
book. I do. I
yeah,
have it. Yeah.
yeah. That's kind of my strategy is, do a year's worth in a quarter. And so
Hmm.
you have 4 years in an actual year, in those quarters. So I think that's kind of what you're talking about. I love that. I love that idea.
Yeah.
Condensing it.
Yeah. And I think the reason because so I'll have like my 1 year plan, and then I'll have it broken down into quarters, and then the quarters broken down into like the weekly and the daily. But the thing is, like, if I'm showing up and I'm working on these daily tasks, they have to be connected to that 1 year plan. And a lot of the times what I find is like, I don't call it distracted, but I get really busy like everybody. We get into our work and we start working on these things, and weeks goes by and I realize like, wow, I am actually not working towards my goal. Like that's why you have to have the 1 year plan to look at it and go, okay, I've been working on, this thing here, and actually it has nothing to do with my goal. I just got really busy working on another project. That's the thing too. I mean, maybe this is a little bit ADHD, which is something else that I struggle with, but I'll start a new project just completely out of the blue. Because as a creator and entrepreneur, I always want to be building something. So I'll start something new because that's exciting, And
Mm-hmm.
when this other project over here gets really difficult, I'll have a tendency to, just push it to put it up on the
Yep.
shelf a little bit and just leave it over there. And, with the intention of going back and doing it later because I want to make this new thing. And then we get into shiny object syndrome because
Mm-hmm.
now I've just started chasing a new shiny object that looks and feels really good. And so that does happen. And I think it's just important for people to recognize that if you're working on something and it gets really hard, that's a good thing. You just may need to, mix things up a little bit and figure out like what's the best. How can I get this thing done? Really. So what it comes down to is the other one of my favorite books is like Who Not How, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because as an entrepreneur, we start working on everything ourselves. Like I always would, try and do everything by myself. And I realized like, well, my goal is to get this thing done. Doesn't mean I have to be the one doing all these things. So I think outsourcing things and hiring other people, just whether you're hiring them on Fiverr or Upwork or, bring them on part-time, like buying back your time is critical. And again, this comes back to the goal setting like having goals, because if you're doing all these things, you're going to have a really hard time getting to your goal. Like you're probably going to end up burning out, which happened to me a couple of times. So I do recommend just looking at how can I get this thing done the fastest, and who can I hire to help me with this.
Really, really good advice. So true. So true. So we've covered a lot of ground today, and I love your story, and I appreciate you telling it. Where can people find you? Where can they go if they have questions or they want to find your books? We'll put links to anything down below in the show notes, but where can they find you, and what would you like them to go to?
Sure, yeah. So they can check out the website at scottallanpublishing.com, and we have a Shopify store at scottallanbooks.com where we're selling everything directly now. And of course, they can always go to Amazon, and they sell a lot of things on there, and I'm sure they can find the books on there as well.
Interesting. Okay, great. Well, I appreciate you, and hey, maybe after the next 10, we'll have you on again, and we'll talk about the next 10 successful books that you have. I'm really amazing what you're doing, and I appreciate you sharing everything. And if anybody has any questions, feel free to reach out. They know they can go to frankharita.com. And I appreciate everybody. Thanks for listening to another episode, and we'll catch you on the next one.
Thank
Take
you.
care.